The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to the Amber Mac Show. I'm on the road this week, but given how much incredible and sometimes disturbing tech news there's been this year, we put together a special episode of the Amber Mac Show looking back on the first half of 2025 through the lens of Jeff's The Other Mac segments. Before we begin, we wanted to remind our listeners of the latest opportunity to be on the show just by going to ambermactalkback.com and leaving us a voice message about your favorite tech movies and TV shows and what you love about the tech in them. That's ambermactalkback.com. Now, as we covered last week, the UK just put online age verification in effect, and they're being joined by US states and countries around the world in trying to do something to protect young people from disturbing content online. But just how does online age verification work, and should you be worried about using it? Jeff covers all of this and more in his segment, Is Online Age Verification Dangerous? Let's take a listen.
Online age verification has been a problem without a great solution for years, but now with over half a dozen U.S. states having enacted online age verification bills, and many more on the way, plus the EU planning to introduce its own age verification app this summer, it's time for us all to understand what's at stake. There's a variety of major industries where age verification already takes place. Obviously, you already have to show ID to buy alcohol and tobacco, for example. But historically, these checks happen in person, which removes a couple of major privacy concerns that exist online. Namely, your ID is not recorded and stored, nor is there any record of you having visited that location just by virtue of your ID being checked. So those are both positives. Now, probably the most common talked about area with respect to online age verification, although there are plenty, for example, the disgraceful tidal wave of online gambling we're unfortunately seeing now. But the most commonly talked about area is likely adult content, which, like many other things we require ID to access, is indisputably harmful to young people. And it also presents a very clear case for why people are so reluctant to embrace online age verification. Most sensible people don't want an adult site to have a copy of their government ID, and most people don't want to risk other people knowing what adult sites they visit. So what are our options to determine someone's age online? Well, the method where you just check a box to assure the site that you're visiting that you're actually of age is just laughably useless. Not sure why that exists. I'm sure it's some kind of liability thing, but obviously people can just lie. So I'm not sure how that is even out there in the wild. But the one that most parallels the real world ID check is uploading identification documents that are scanned to determine your age. But as we've already discussed, this can be a major privacy issue if those documents are stored by the verifying party. Then there are highly technical but less reliable methods that include things like facial identification, where the verification site uses your camera to see your face in order to evaluate your age. Now, this can be done without your image being permanently saved, which is definitely a benefit, but the results can vary so much that it's also far from ideal. Now, in order to avoid having the issue with an adult or online gambling site directly accessing your data, there are many third-party services that will do online age checks, which still leaves your data vulnerable, but at least it's under the control of a company that likely takes digital security more seriously than many sites you'd be trying to access. Although obviously these companies themselves are very attractive targets for hackers because of that exact data. Now, a recent compelling solution involving France's École Polytechnique adds an intermediary between the website you're trying to access and whoever is conducting the age verification, which means the website doesn't have access to your ID and the age verifier doesn't know which sites you're going to. Instead, the intermediary service passes the age verification request to the verifying entity and then passes the results of verification, basically a yes, they're old enough or no, they're not old enough, back to the website. This is a definite improvement. Now, whatever the approach, it doesn't seem like the challenge of online age verification is going to go away anytime soon. So it's important that we all know the risks and that any required verification is done in a way that poses the least danger to your personal information, which includes not just your identification, but also the sites you visit.
So obviously, age verification is really about protecting young people. So it's great to see it moving forward. But as Jeff discusses in his Are We Failing to Keep Kids Safe Online segment from episode 12, there's a lot more to be done given some of the terrible things that the internet has enabled.
Well, Western society has a lot to feel humble about these days, but perhaps the most shameful thing we've done in recent years is pretty much abandoning significant protections for children on the internet. I know, you'll point to promises made here and there by social media companies or questionable actions by government that purport to help, but all in all, we've quite simply been failing on this measure. For example, as recently reported by CBC, 2 men have been arrested and charged with running an international child exploitation enterprise known as 764 that targets vulnerable minors online and coerces them to self-harm, make child sexual abuse material of themselves, and participate in violent acts, including animal abuse and even suicide. To join, potential members had to share content including child sexual abuse or self-harm, and the 764 group provided a guide for how to target and groom vulnerable kids. To make things even worse, some of the members of 764 are minors themselves, and the group has been forging alliances with other violent groups, promoting mass attacks, targeted killings, and leading to multiple murders. And even if we could get rid of these criminals targeting children via chats online, we'd still have so much other harmful material to deal with. For example, Wired just reported about the YouTube channel GoCat, which describes itself as a fun and exciting channel for kids. With almost 25,000 subscribers and over 7 million views, its content includes cartoon cats and minions being eaten, beaten, starved, and sexualized. Remember 2017's Elsagate? YouTube videos aimed at kids with characters from Frozen, Spider-Man, and Peppa Pig involved in sexual and abusive situations? Well, AI has definitely made this even worse, with the ability for even the most talentless monsters out there to create horrible videos. Now, YouTube does at times address these issues, and it looks like the GoCat channel has been taken down, but the rising tide of new disturbing content just keeps on coming. So what can we do about this? Well, the first line of defense is parenting, a responsibility that's been made more difficult by other parents, peers, and even governments, making it harder than ever for parents to assert their right to know what's going on in their children's lives. Regardless, renewed vigilance by parents in terms of being aware of what their kids are doing online is likely the most powerful tool we have in our arsenals right now. Next, we've got the social media platforms, who have no real financial incentives to do anything about this, given how many parents are as addicted to social media as their kids, and most threats to abandon platforms that don't do enough to protect kids have been shown to be pretty hollow. Finally, government. Unfortunately, a great number of people in government don't understand the depth of these issues, and they may have their focus diluted by other legitimately important things. But at the end of the day, all government can try to do is to make the platforms that allow this kind of heinous activity address it themselves. So we're caught in a circle, a horrible circle. Parents are too timid about their own rights relative to their children, and so look to the government. Government is too distracted and usually too technically naive to get social media platforms to change in significant ways. And social media platforms make too much money to want to tinker with things, with some of them using that very money in turn to influence government. This is usually the part where I try to present a better solution to the problem, but there frankly isn't one. At the end of the day, the people who really cares what happens to kids are parents of those kids. And there's nobody who's going to step in to relieve us of this very challenging duty. So keep pushing social media platforms to change. Keep pushing governments to make those social media platforms change. But remember that there is no one who can protect your child from these nightmarish scenarios better than you. So be strong, be prepared for some uncomfortable conversation with your kids, but know you're doing the right thing.
And it's not just the kids who aren't all right, whether it's because of social media, the political climate, or something else. There's also what people are calling the loneliness epidemic. But as Jeff covers in his Don't Trust Zuckerberg's AI Friends from our 13th episode, it seems pretty unlikely that AI is the answer.
Mark Zuckerberg said recently, and I quote, "The average American, I think, has, it's fewer than 3 friends, 3 people they'd consider friends, and the average person has demand for meaningfully more. I think it's like 15 friends." Well, thankfully, Zuck is going to solve this problem for us. Not by doing anything about how divisive and purposely addictive his own social media platforms are. No. But by gifting us all with Meta AI friends. Now, we've talked a lot about AI replacing workers across different industries, and there's definitely an argument to be made to call that progress if we can figure out how, as a society, to handle the resulting employment disruptions. But I think we should all draw the line at AI friends. Good friends provide their own perspective, their own insights that no algorithm is going to deliver. Plus, good friends can be there for you, and I mean physically there for you. Humans are wired to give other humans special considerations in many ways, like being able to quickly recognize a human face or the way somebody walks. And while future robotics may be able to conquer some of these physical hurdles, we're a lifetime away from them not being detectable by your average human being, if that ever happens at all. In fact, I abandoned my initial master's thesis on virtual worlds because there are aspects that immersion cannot easily overcome. And look, we're 3 years past Zuckerberg's declaration that people would flock to his metaverse that he built so they could use his augmented reality glasses to live a better life, I guess. How did that work out? Anyway, let's leave the importance of physical presence to most friendships behind, but it absolutely is a hurdle. So how would Zuck make sure these AI friends could fulfill their other responsibilities? Well, he's explained that this would require, quote, a deep understanding of what's going on in this person's life. And I mean, you can kind of see where this is going, right? More data for Mark. On top of that, the Wall Street Journal recently reported that, and I quote again, inside Meta, staffers across multiple departments have raised concerns that the company's rush to popularize these AI bots may have crossed ethical lines, including by quietly endowing AI personas with the capacity for fantasy sex, and they also warned that the company wasn't protecting underage users from such sexually explicit discussions. So we talked last week about online dangers for kids, so definitely check that out, and it's right up the alley here. But let's just say that billionaire tech bros ignoring very real risks to their users in the name of progress, or should I more correctly say in the name of profit, is getting to be a pretty reliable prediction. So in short, the guy who took an app to rate how hot college students were and turned it into the largest social media network on the planet, which used algorithms to addict people to its use, which in turn has played a major role in making the modern West as divided and angry as it is today. The guy who used the personal data people provided on those networks to make himself one of the richest people in history, and who has time and time again tried to hide the data his own company has gathered on the harms it causes. He wants you to trust him when he says he's got an AI solution for the breakdown of the personal relationships that his own previous creation facilitated. He'll just need a little bit more of your data, please. Well, friendship's too important to leave in the hands of people so rich that they're probably a bit skeptical of some of their own friendships. So do your part to stop this madness. Go have a coffee with somebody you recently met. Share a walk with somebody through the park on a sunny day. Reach out to a friend you haven't talked to in a while, or head out to a social event to make new friends. And if you find yourself in Halifax, Nova Scotia, then reach out to me, Jeff MacArthur, for a patio beer.
Now, all of our problems aren't AI driven, and some of them require some real world intervention to make things better. Unfortunately, as Jeff covers in The Problem with Cars from episode 8, many of our politicians seem unwilling to do what needs to be done to improve things.
Trump's tariffs cover a lot of ground, but one aspect that gets a great deal of focus is auto tariffs. So I'm going to take this opportunity to talk a bit about cars. Obviously, the Western world, but particularly the US and Canada, has had a century-long love affair with the car, to such a degree that as environmental concerns have become especially pressing in more recent years, some of the most vocal defenders of the environment have proposed solutions involving investing billions of dollars trying to establish domestic battery manufacturing industries and things like that. What has been mostly lost in this approach is the hard conversation about cars themselves being the problem. Now, there are many good reasons why personal vehicles will continue to exist, especially in rural areas, but it astounds me to see so many medium and large cities all across Canada and the United States mostly drop the ball on public transit. As one example, in my hometown of Halifax, the Premier in Nova Scotia just got rid of tolls on our 2 major bridges, sacrificing the government revenue to maintain those bridges so that cars can cross more easily. Meanwhile, the public transit pedestrian ferries that cross our harbors every day are regularly canceled because of a lack of investment from the government, so people can't rely on them and traffic gets worse and worse. In urban settings, the losses aren't just environmental. Ever-increasing car traffic means more congestion, which means more wasted time, which means lost economic opportunity. In 2024, Toronto topped the list of the most congested cities in North America and was the 3rd worst in the entire world. According to one study, it takes Toronto commuters an average of 29 minutes just to complete a 10-kilometer or 6.2-mile trip. And that's almost a minute worse than it was just the year before. In fact, Torontonians lost an average of 98 hours in 2023 due to rush hour traffic. If we're looking at a standard 40-hour-per-week job, that's like working an extra 2.5 weeks every year. Think of what that means in terms of the economic impact in a city of over 3 million people. So what else can we do to deal with this? Well, people might complain about bike lanes and the like making traffic worse than ever, but I think there's something more insidious than that contributing to slower traffic, namely the widespread use of smartphones by drivers. I mean, walk down the street and look at traffic, look at the cars. You'll no doubt see people on their phones, at best leading to long pauses before they rejoin the flow of traffic, and at worst, creating accidents that grind traffic to a halt. What you almost certainly won't see is anyone being ticketed for being on their phone, and so now we've got a generation of people who think it's okay not to be looking at the road while they drive. It's pretty clear that the police don't want to do that job, so politicians either need to force them to, or create some other means to punish people who break the law in dangerous ways every single time they get into a car. Unfortunately for those who try to do the right thing by taking public transit in big cities like Toronto, instead of seeing drivers' heads buried in their phones, they'll get to enjoy people smoking crack on the bus because of similar lack of governmental accountability. So, as our cities drown in personal vehicle traffic, making sure more of those cars are electric instead of fossil fuel powered is avoiding a core reality that big cities should not have to accommodate so much of their population wanting to drive around in their own cars to go to work every day. Moves like this could even help the housing problem by freeing up the massive amounts of space that car parking takes up in cities. So here are 3 things I think need to be done. 1, politicians need to get serious about investing in public transit. It's the most sensible place to invest in electric vehicles, and it can be the most effective solution to traffic congestion while also helping the environment, freeing up housing space, and positively impacting the economy. 2, we also need to insist that police forces invest an appropriate amount of time enforcing cell phone use while driving laws. And at the same time, how about ticketing anyone who blocks an intersection while you're at it? These things matter, and if politicians can't make cops do that, then they need to create some separate municipal enforcement unit that they could fund entirely from all the tickets you'd be able to write during every single rush hour in almost any city. And finally, driving isn't a right, it's a privilege. The only reason we can't more easily revoke licenses from people who don't deserve them, at least in cities, is because politicians have come up so reliably short on providing the public transit alternative that every decent-sized city should have. In conclusion, as we face an increasingly unpredictable world, let's take the opportunity to do some hard things right. So make sure you let your elected representatives know how you feel.
With the world around us changing so rapidly, it's important that we can leverage technology to solve some of society's biggest problems. Canada's new government, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, was elected this spring and has a host of challenges ahead of them. Just after the election, Jeff shared what he'd like to see in Canada's digital future as part of our 11th episode.
Here is my advice for digital priorities for a better Canada. I'm going to focus on 3 things that will not only make Canadians' lives better, but that'll also make us more productive and more competitive, 2 things our country dearly needs to succeed. My top priority is for the majority of Canadians to be able to file taxes online without the use of an accountant. In Estonia, you can do this in 5 minutes. The CRA already has the information it needs to file taxes on behalf of most Canadians, and the goal here would be to receive an email with CRA's estimate of what you owe, a link to how they calculated it, and another link to provide information to request a reassessment if necessary. And what most people don't really realize about this and why it's so important is that many of the benefits that politicians announce for poorer Canadians simply never reach those people if they don't file their taxes. So this measure can help the poor more than anyone. Next up for me is national healthcare records. Yes, I get healthcare is a provincial responsibility, so someone please tell federal politicians and voters that. But the fact remains that healthcare is not infrequently delivered outside of one's home province, and the federal government coming up with a system that could serve all Canadians would be far better than waiting for 10 provinces to get up to speed, and probably safer too, and we'll talk about that in the next point. Third is to be able to vote online. This election cost taxpayers about $600 million and employed 250,000 workers, so that each of us could put a single check marks in a single box. And that doesn't even consider lost work time for going to the polls or other related costs, including environmental costs if you're doing calculations like that. So what is our national reluctance in 2025 about doing these things? Well, one of my favorite sayings I've heard about Canada during my years working in international development was that the Canadian bureaucracy is so risk averse that if they were a hockey team, they'd put 6 goaltenders on the ice. Well, we can no longer afford that luxury, and anyone who's suffered through the now nearly $4 billion Phoenix pay system fiasco has seen how the combination of risk aversion and a deep lack of accountability is a recipe for disaster in complex systems like these. And while it may not be comforting, we also need to get over the fear of online attacks. Between social media oversharing by most people and the regular hacks we see of banks, hospitals, and the like, that ship has sailed. If that's an unsurmountable concern for you, then maybe we just need to do a better job at it, which takes me to my final point. While our modern political culture has been deeply invested in training us that words matter more than actions, that's just not true. So if you want to claim that Canada is the greatest country in the world and nothing is beyond us, then let's actually do the hard work of proving that, because we've been doing a terrible job of it for a while now. Will some accountants lose their jobs with online tax filing? Yes, of course they will. Will some people have their medical data compromised? Yes, and that's already happening. But will Canadians be happier and more productive? Yes, they will be, and the risk is worth it. Canadians need to start pairing their strong words in support of Canadian independence with a tolerance for risk and an insistence on change that Canada cannot succeed without. So let's do what's right, make sure our citizens are digitally literate. Let's make sure all of these systems are completely audible and transparent so that citizens will always know whenever anyone, anywhere uses their data. But most importantly, let's make sure that we're willing to match our words to our actions, hold our politicians and bureaucrats to account, and stop pretending it won't be hard. We're Canadian. We can do this. Let's prove it.
We'll be back after this short break to talk about AI, crypto, Elon Musk, and more on The Other Mac's Look Back at 2025 on The Amber Mac Show.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Another thing we're losing with technology seems to be trust. And this loss is driving people to resort to things like cryptocurrencies in an effort to protect themselves. Or is it more about enriching themselves? Jeff covers this and more in Curbing Crypto from our 4th episode.
Earlier this month, President Donald Trump, among many other questionable declarations, announced that the United States would establish a strategic cryptocurrency reserve, which understandably caused the 5 specific cryptocurrencies he said would be included to gain significant value. Now, I think there are some very cool technologies involved in cryptocurrency, like blockchain, which is amazing and super useful. But we also know there are downsides. As one example, the annual electricity consumption dedicated to just Bitcoin mining is comparable to the electricity consumption of the entire country of Poland. So it's not good for the environment. Now, I won't go down the rabbit hole of why I think cryptocurrencies aren't a good idea, and certainly not a good idea for governments to get involved with. But I think most of us could agree that an ongoing sentiment that underlies the justification for crypto is that you can't really trust the government, and at the extreme, should society fail, you need alternative currency. And frankly, crypto is a pretty good solution for those things. So now understand that the value of any given cryptocurrency goes up the more people want to buy it. Then it's certainly the case that the people who want you to buy it have invested in that cryptocurrency. And when you buy that cryptocurrency, as we just went over, the value of their cryptocurrency goes up. So they really want you to buy it. And it'd be even better if, say, just pick something out of the air, a large government decided to buy some. And if the selling point is the concern that you can't trust the government and that you need to protect yourself in the event of societal collapse, then we need to recognize that the people who want you to buy cryptocurrencies are also invested in making you feel that the government can't really be trusted and that society is, at best, struggling. Now look around you. Does that seem familiar at all? We have been witnessing some of the most brazen grifts in history in our recent past, and we need to pay much closer attention when the people trying to convince us to do things are the very people who'd profit most from them. Whether that's AI tycoons insisting that we can't afford to have any guardrails, or the crypto for all crowd expecting that you don't really understand how they're profiting off of you, we all need to better educate ourselves on whether the next big thing is valuable to us, valuable to society as a whole, or just to those who make so much off the grift that they can happily survive any consequential misery.
Speaking of trust, which seems to be disappearing relative to politicians and the media, AI is not helping the situation at all. Jeff talks about imaginary books and creative crooks in episode 15's The Truth About AI Lies.
We talk a lot about AI on our show that may go a little bit over the heads of people who don't have much reason to be interested in big AI acquisitions or theoretical concerns that may not have much relevance to them, and at least today. But a recent AI story had a lot of people up in arms, and I think that's great. In mid-May, both the Chicago Sun-Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer published a summer guide insert that included an article about 15 recommended new and old novels that would, quote, deliver the perfect summer escape. Well, if the escape you were talking about is an escape from reality, then maybe they had a point, as it turns out that 10 of the 15 novels simply did not exist ever. While some of the author names were real authors, 2/3 of the book recommendations were fake book titles and fake descriptions for books that were never written. The list was created by Marco Buscaglia, a freelance writer and content strategist who's seemingly used AI to create much of the article, even though that is specifically forbidden by the newspaper's policies. Buscaglia said in an interview with 404 Media, and I quote, "I do use AI for background at times, but always check out the material first. This time I did not, and I can't believe I missed it because it's so obvious. No excuses, on me 100%. So before we go on, Mr. Buscaglia, like too many other people, doesn't seem to understand the meaning of the word always, given that he obviously doesn't always check out the material first, as he claims, as he certainly did not check it out this time. So I'll file that one with people who use figuratively to mean literally and literally to mean figuratively, I guess. But it just goes to show how little some people are interested in accuracy and truth these days, especially people selling things to us. And it didn't stop with the book names. Other articles that were provided for the summer insert also seem to have AI-generated sections, including one that fabricates a professor of leisure studies at the University of Colorado and manufactures quotes that don't seem to have ever been uttered by the people they're attributed to. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sick about people apologizing for doing shady things only after they've been caught and then expecting forgiveness. Stories like this not only further confirm that it's not just the tech bros who are happily engaged in lazily dishonest activities to make money, but they also show how mass media has become polluted with weak content that's created just to fill space instead of to educate and entertain us in meaningful ways. The saddest part is that I don't expect any of this to change. And the best we may be able to hope for is that the outlets who publish this kind of content might someday use AI to check to see if the content they're printing from AI contains AI hallucinations. But again, I feel like they'd only care if they got caught. I'd say the best advice in this instance would be to go to your local library and ask a real human being librarian for their recommendations, because librarians are real and they do really care about this kind of thing. But if you're just looking for some newspapers to start a fire with, I have at least a couple suggestions for you.
The effects of AI are being seen across society, from job cuts to the damage it's doing to trust with deepfakes, hallucinations, and more. But it's also threatening to ruin the internet by flooding it with garbage content. This is more about what Jeff speaks about in his segment, Fight AI Slop or Social Media Dies, from episode 19.
Those of you with your finger on the pulse of tech news have probably already heard about Google's VO3 video generation AI lately, which is amongst the most impressive of these kind of tools around today. But what you might not have heard is the recent announcement from YouTube's CEO that VO3 will be integrated into YouTube Shorts in the next few months as YouTube competes with TikTok and Instagram Reels in online video shorts. Now, to paraphrase Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park, it seems to me that Google is so preoccupied with whether or not they could do this that they didn't stop to think if they should. While VO's video generation results are reliably not low quality anymore, that doesn't mean it won't overwhelm YouTube Shorts with AI slop. In terms of the content we consume, we've now got AI-generated books clogging up ebook sites, AI-generated music sneaking onto streaming services, AI-generated images invading stock photo sites, AI ads becoming more and more common, as we just talked about in our news segment, and bots deeply compromising the quality of many social media sites. Even my beloved Pinterest is absolutely overrun with garbage AI images and accounts that do nothing but share that kind of content. And users like me have no recourse at all, and that's the norm. Cory Doctorow coined the term that I'll rename encrapification in order for us to stay family-friendly, but it certainly relates to the avalanche of AI slop that we're all subjected to online. Cory wrote in Wired, "Here is how platforms die. First, they are good to their users. Then they abuse their users to make things better for their business customers. Finally, they abuse those business customers to claw back all the value from themselves. Then they die." Well, it's certainly easy to see this kind of thing if you've been doing any business on Facebook in the back end there, but you can experience it on dating apps, Amazon shopping, Google search, and lots of other places online. And the big issue I see is that none of these big sites are at any risk of dying, regardless of how much they abuse their users. Dr. O actually proposed a two-pronged solution to combat the encrapification of these platforms. Point one is that a network should reliably deliver data from willing senders to willing receivers. Consider this with respect to social media algorithms and how manipulative they can be in terms of serving the platform's needs more than the user's needs. Now, I don't know how YouTube's algorithm is going to treat VO3 generated content, but there's certainly a Google business case to prefer it, even though I don't imagine many users would prefer that content over authentic creator-produced video. And Cory's second point is that users should have the right to exit so they can go elsewhere if they don't want to have to put up with your platform anymore, these kind of abuses. This, unfortunately, would require interoperability so that you could easily move your data to another service. And I think we all know that's just not something that any of the major social media networks really facilitate. The catch-22 for users here is that we want a platform to have a critical mass of accounts of interest, and that leads us to larger networks. But then those larger networks are motivated to not make it easy for you to leave as they try to wring the most value out of your presence there. And it's frustrating, and I feel at some point something's got to give because users deserve to have a choice about this kind of thing. In the meantime, it seems that big players like Google are content to see how far they can push their users, using our data to train their AI and then forcing it down our throats and pretending that's some kind of progress. Pinterest has almost been ruined by the amount of AI slop that's on there, and Google favoring videos generated by their own AI would be yet another step down a path that nobody wants to walk on.
So AI slop is everywhere now, and it looks like it'll get worse before it gets any better, with AI images and video becoming increasingly common. We've looked at its effects on creative industries in interviews we've done, and Jeff is going to talk as a former professional musician and composer about something close to his heart, why AI music sucks, from episode 21.
You may have seen my recent segment of The Other Mac where I talk about AI slop, but little did I know that at the time the groundwork was being laid for one of the most unusual slop stories I've come across so far. You may have heard of the band The Velvet Sundown. No, not The Velvet Underground, which the name seems to be purposely evocative of, but The Velvet Sundown, and how in just a few weeks they amassed over 1 million listens on their two almost simultaneously released albums on Spotify. Now, some people thought this was kind of strange, given there is absolutely no record of the band ever having performed anywhere, and the band's images looked very much like they were AI generated. In fact, Rick Beato, one of the best musical follows on YouTube, by the way, he then analyzed their music and concluded that it was almost certainly all AI generated as well. Now, the band's social media accounts initially pushed back on these accusations, saying they were lazy and baseless. However, not long after that, a man using the pseudonym Andrew Frelin told Rolling Stone that he was behind the band and that he used Suno AI music software to create the music, and that the whole thing was what he called an art hoax. As a musician, I was not impressed, but I left it at that for the moment, until the Velvet Sundown social media accounts claimed that Andrew Frellin had absolutely nothing to do with the band and that his connection was the real hoax. And apparently they were right, as Frellin subsequently admitted that his involvement was just a social engineering experiment and that he did indeed have nothing at all to do with the band. At that point, under increasing scrutiny, the Velvet Sundown's account finally admitted that the band and their music is actually AI, or as they put it, quote, a synthetic music project guided by human creative direction and composed, voiced, and visualized with the support of artificial intelligence. I think support is doing a lot of hard work there. But anyway, now this is not the first time a musical act has been revealed to be AI-based, and it certainly won't be the last. But what are we to make of this kind of thing? I see three real big takeaways. One, AI music is just not very good. You may not care about whether music is created by humans or AI, but take a listen to the Velvet Sundown, and you'll hear some very mediocre music with lyrics bordering on terrible. In other words, it's totally AI slop that serves no constructive purpose other than to drown out the efforts of hardworking human musicians, who, I have to note, are making this a bit easier on AI as they get listeners increasingly comfortable listening to heavily auto-tuned and time-quantized recordings. So maybe AI music will get better, but I sincerely do not know why anyone would want it to. 2, streaming services are too easily manipulated. Whether that's manipulation by people posing as artists or manipulations by the streaming platform itself, something Spotify in particular has been accused of many times, there's something wrong when an entirely fictional band making not very good music can get 1 million listens over several weeks. Whether that's the algorithm doing stupid things or the streaming companies doing shady things, the only thing I know for sure is it's definitely not good for music or for musicians. And 3, technology is being used as a tool to compromise trust. Whether intentionally or not, this insane story shows how easily technology can be used to misrepresent things. We start with an imaginary band launching 2 AI albums that its creators swore were not AI. Then we have an unrelated third party claiming to have been in charge of the whole thing and saying it was indeed AI. And then the band's representative getting upset that someone else would dare take credit for their efforts, but then ultimately admitting that the whole thing was, yes, it was AI. This yielded stories everywhere from the Rolling Stone to the CBC, all of which play right into the original creators' hands by drawing attention to their imaginary band, which substantially increases the listens, all of which influences the streaming algorithms to give them even more prominence, and this then rewards the fraudulent and, I expect, musically talentless original creator, while most human musicians continue to struggle to make ends meet. As a musician and composer, this is a terrible sign of where things will likely go in the future of music. But even just as a human being, the whole ordeal shows how truth-averse so many people in our society are, and I think that's the real danger.
Well, we're heading into the home stretch, and if there is a name that's been missing from this episode up until this point, you might guess who it is. Yes, we'll be back after the break to talk about Elon Musk, Grok, Mars, and the America Party. So stick around.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Let's close off with how 2025 has been so far for probably the most prominent figure in tech these days, namely Elon Musk. We'll get to Grok and the America Party next, but first, let's take a look at Musk's long-standing obsession with getting humans to Mars in Musk on Mars from our 5th episode.
Well, Elon Musk is talking about Mars again. He recently posted that he wants to send humans to Mars as soon as 2029 or more likely 2031. So let's ignore that in 2016 he said he wanted to send humans to Mars by 2024, and how in 2017 he said he'd be offering private trips around the moon for the following year, which didn't happen, and his Tesla cyber taxi promises and all the other imaginary dates that Elon Musk has conjured into existence over the years, and ask, why is Elon Musk so intent on going to Mars? As Musk has said, he wants to, quote, make it so that anyone can travel to Mars if they would like to, and with the eventual goal of being, quote, to make Mars a self-sustaining civilization. Because, and I'll quote Musk from 2020 on this, if there's something terrible that happens on Earth, either made by humans or natural, we want to have, like, life insurance for life as a whole. And it's a bit strange that 5 years later, Musk seems to be at least somewhat interested in making terrible things happen right here on Earth himself, and pairs this with an adversarial stance relative to NASA and an obvious financial motive behind the private for-profit SpaceX that Musk is CEO of. But we talked about that kind of thing last week in my crypto piece, and I do think space exploration is incredible. There are amazing scientific opportunities provided by being in space that aren't achievable on Earth. But the price of getting humans to Mars is enormous, and the things we have to overcome to get there aren't necessarily things that are going to help us on this planet, a planet that's currently having some very pressing issues. For one thing, it's extraordinarily hard on the human body to be in space for prolonged amounts of time. One study is examining how extended space travel causes things like your brain compressing because it's pushing up against the top of your skull in microgravity, and how biomarkers associated with neurodegenerative diseases seem to rise significantly after long periods in space. And we're not talking about a few days to the moon, we're talking about a few years to do a manned mission to Mars. Beyond that, the costs have been estimated to be $500 billion US or more. In my opinion, we now have more than ever the need to think about scientific advances that can help us all live better lives here on Earth, and not vanity projects of questionable values by people whose motives seem glaringly apparent. So in closing, let me suggest a much better use for these enormous amounts of money by quoting the great comic Bill Hicks. Spend it feeding and clothing and educating the poor of the world, which it would do many times over, not one human being excluded, and then we could explore space together, both inner and outer, forever in peace.
We've covered how Musk's Grok AI chatbot has been behaving multiple times, each one followed by xAI's insistence that they've dealt with the issue and this shouldn't be a problem again. So let's go back to before Grok's latest racist tirade when he called himself Mecha Hitler and insisted that the Nazi leader would be the man to solve all of today's problem in our July episode, to Jeff's segment from our 14th episode in May. Here's Musk's Grok AI on white genocide.
By now, you may have come across stories about how Elon Musk's Grok AI, which is integrated into X, has been bringing up the topic of white genocide in South Africa in the middle of inquiries that have absolutely no relation to that subject at all, including in response to a question about a wrestling match, and also somebody asking how many times HBO has changed its streaming service's name, which I think is 3 or 4 now. But given that there are currently over 4.5 million white people counted in South Africa's most recent census, hundreds of thousands more than a quarter century ago, I think we can put aside the notion that there's been anything like a white genocide in that country and instead try to figure out what would compel an AI to claim such a thing. Grok's responses were taken down, but according to a report by CNBC, Grok originally explained, I quote, "It appears I was instructed to address the topic of white genocide in South Africa." However, it later changed its response to similar questions to, quote, "No, I wasn't programmed to give any answers promoting or endorsing harmful ideologies, including anything related to white genocide or similar conspiracies." Okay. Well, now xAI, Musk's company that created Grok, has tried to explain away the problem by saying an unauthorized modification to Grok led to these responses, and that this violated its internal policies and core values, and then it promised to put in place further checks so employees can't modify Grok without review. Now, you may remember that just a couple months ago, Grok was censoring sources criticizing Elon Musk and Donald Trump with respect to spreading misinformation. Do you know what AI's explanation was? That a rogue employee had modified Grok. And so it's happened again, eh? So we've got an AI chatbot that will contradict itself after being accused, while the company that made it insists that they've taken the necessary steps, again, to prevent people in their own company from making these modifications after seemingly failing on that exact task just months ago. Now, it has occurred to me, and to many others, that, Musk was born and lived his childhood in South Africa, and has himself absolutely promoted the idea of white genocide in that country on X. And it seems that President Trump agrees with this notion, having just provided refugee status to welcome in a group of white South Africans within a week or so of this happening. In fact, one of Grok's responses to the matter said, and I quote again, "The likely source of this instruction aligns with Elon Musk's influence, giving his public statements on the matter." Regardless, the real takeaway from this is that the trust that the tech bros are asking us to put in AI is entirely for their own benefit, and that a company that wants to be valued at $120 billion with an entirely digital product can't seem to prevent its own employees from changing its code in malicious ways, or track that they've done it, or when they did it, or who did it, or anything like this, judging by the lack of progress that was made months after Grok's similar Trump-Musk disinformation issues in February. So I guess we'll never officially know how an AI created by a company, controlled by a CEO founder who likes to have direct access to company code, and who is a white South African with extreme right-wing views that include repeated proclamations about one white genocide in South Africa. Yeah, I guess we'll just never know how that AI could have possibly ended up promoting that very same idea. I suppose we'll just have to go back to wondering what the heck is the matter with all those windows in Russia that enemies of the government keep innocently falling out of. Or maybe we should just leave that job to AI. Something tells me that's what Elon and his ilk would prefer.
And finally, in a year that's shown a disturbing amount of political activity in the tech world, Jeff discusses whether Elon Musk's New America Party has a chance of accomplishing anything in the problems with Musk's America Party from episode 22 of The Amber Mac Show.
Well, as we've previously covered, Elon Musk's bromance with Donald Trump has effectively ended with the passage of Trump's deeply irresponsible One Big Beautiful Bill, with Musk declaring that he's going to create a new political party called the America Party as an alternative to what he called the Democrat-Republican Uniparty, leaving behind the obvious question of judgment that this raises, given how Musk spent over $250 million last year to get Trump and other Republicans elected, only to now say that they are basically the same as the Democrats he hates. We thought we'd take a look at whether his proposal itself is actually viable. Frankly, in the spirit of a broken clock being right twice a day, Musk is obviously right about how dysfunctional America's two-party system has become. Indeed, he's not the only tech billionaire who's frustrated, with OpenAI's CEO Sam Altman declaring that he's politically homeless, web entrepreneur Mark Cuban seeming to support Musk's proposal, to say nothing of what I imagine to be millions of Americans who are verging on despondent about their political options. And it's not hard to see why. Even former Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang said that he supports the idea. But the real question is whether a new party can solve anything. And the answer really depends on the approach. So first of all, let's deal with the most obvious point. A third-party candidate is almost certainly not going to become president, given the distorting effects of the Electoral College, which is reflected in the fact that no third-party candidate in history has ever even come close. Ross Perot's 1992 run as an independent, he got 20% of the vote, and that resulted in exactly 0 Electoral College votes. So there will not be a third-party president anytime soon. But what about Musk's proposed strategy of picking a handful of House and Senate races to focus on in hopes that the America Party can hold the balance of power between the Democrats and Republicans? This has much greater potential, and it's good that Musk is focusing at that level, as election results are often so close these days that just a few representatives could make a difference in a lot of votes. But the biggest problem with changing U.S. politics, and Canada has similar difficulties around this, is the first-past-the-post system. And it makes it very difficult to break into a two-party system like the States because third-party voters basically take votes away from the party they'd next most want to have win. So it's hard to motivate them to gamble on the outcome, knowing that their third party would have to win a plurality of the votes to win the seat. Now, this is why proportional representation is so essential if we want to avoid two-party domination. There are several different ways to do this. It's used by successful countries all around the world, but the gist is that proportional representation awards parties with seats in such a way that they are proportional to the percentage of votes the party got. So if your party got 40% of the votes, then they'll get 40% of the seats. Contrast this with Canada's most recent first-past-the-post election, where the Liberals and Conservatives were actually within a couple of percentage points of total votes from one another, but the Liberal Party wound up with 24 more seats than the Conservatives. Now, it's very difficult in the states to change federal voting laws because any change is going to have to be voted in by the parties who it's going to work against. So the two major parties and their representatives would have to essentially vote to disempower themselves. So that's pretty unlikely to happen. However, there is encouraging movement happening at the state and local levels to adopt proportional representation. And that's the most likely avenue to real change in how Americans vote. So that's where I'd put my effort in if I were Musk. But let's make something absolutely clear. Aside from having more money than literally anyone in the world in all of history, Elon Musk would be a terrible figurehead for any new party. And there's no telling if his new party idea is something that he'll quickly become bored of. But that doesn't mean other people can't start making progress, especially at the state and local level, to at least bring increased awareness of other voting options to American people. Lord knows what's happening right now is not working very well.
Remember, you can get all of Jeff's The Other Mac segments as well as our weekly tech news and interviews over on YouTube. Thank you so much for tuning in to this special episode. Jeff and I will be back together next week to get you up to date on the latest tech news. In the meantime, please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And remember, leave us a voice message at ambermactalkback.com about your favorite tech movies and TV shows. And remember, you can get all of our content over at theambermacshow.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.